Hello and welcome to another session here at the Easy English Stories Home, the channel where we dive deep into the personal stories and experiences of English learners from all walks of life. Whether you're a beginner just starting to explore the world of English, or you've been on this journey for a while and are looking for new ways to improve, this session is for you. Today, I'll be sharing something really close to my heart, the story of how I learned English at home. This isn't a story of grand language schools or immersion in an English-speaking country. No, it's a story of perseverance, resourcefulness, and how I built my English skills from my own living room, using the tools and resources I had at my disposal. I know many of you are learning English at home right now. Maybe you're balancing work, family, and studies, or maybe you're wondering if it's even possible to learn English without formal classes. I'm here to tell you that it absolutely is, and I'll be walking you through the exact steps I took. I'll share long, concrete examples from my journey, as well as the struggles I faced and how I overcame them. So, grab a cup of tea or coffee, settle in, and get ready to hear the story of my English learning experience at home. Before we jump in, don't forget to subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. Your support means the world to us, and by subscribing, you'll never miss out on future episodes filled with tips, strategies, and more stories that can help you on your own English learning journey. Chapter 1. The Starting Point. Let's go back to the very beginning. Like many of you, I had a desire to learn English, but I didn't have the means or time to attend traditional language schools. I was working a full-time job, juggling family responsibilities, and simply couldn't afford to spend hours in a classroom. So I had to get creative. I remember sitting at home one day feeling frustrated. I knew I needed to improve my English for my career, but I didn't know where to start. Should I buy textbooks? Should I watch movies in English? There were so many options, and I didn't know what would work best. Finally, I decided to make a plan. The first thing I did was set small, achievable goals. I didn't start by saying, I'm going to be fluent in 6 months. That would have been overwhelming. Instead, I set a goal to spend 30 minutes each day practicing English. Just 30 minutes, no more, no less. And believe me, those 30 minutes made all the difference. For example, I started by learning 5 new words every day. That doesn't sound like much, does it? But here's a fun fact. If you learn just 5 new words every day, you'll know over 1,800 new words in a year. And guess what? Those words add up fast, especially when you're consistent. Chapter 2. My learning tools. Now let's talk about the tools I used. Since I was learning at home, I didn't have access to a lot of fancy resources, but I made the most of what I had. The first tool I used was something I'm sure many of you already have: YouTube. I remember stumbling upon English learning channels, and that was a game changer. Channels dedicated to teaching English grammar, vocabulary, and even pronunciation. I would spend my 30 minutes watching videos that explained English concepts in simple terms. And the best part? These videos were free. Let me give you a long example of how I used YouTube to improve my listening skills. I used to watch a channel that focused on daily English conversations. The host would act out common scenarios, like ordering food at a restaurant or having a conversation at work. I would listen carefully, then pause the video and repeat the sentences out loud. I must have repeated some sentences 10 or 20 times until I felt comfortable with them. Over time, I noticed a huge improvement in my ability to understand spoken English. According to studies, learners who spend at least 70% of their time exposed to the language in a natural context, like listening to conversations or watching videos, improve their listening and speaking skills up to 40% faster than those who only study grammar. And I was living proof of that. Another tool I used was language learning apps. One app that really stood out for me was Duolingo. I know it's a bit cliché, but it worked for me. The daily lessons were short and sweet, but they reinforced the vocabulary and grammar I was learning elsewhere. Plus, I could practice whenever I had a spare moment, whether I was waiting in line or sitting on the bus. Here's a concrete example. I would practice the app's restaurant module, and then later that day when I was making lunch, I'd try to think of all the words and phrases related to food that I had learned. I'm cooking. I'm cutting vegetables. I'm boiling water. It became a habit to translate my daily actions into English. Over time, I noticed I was thinking in English without even trying. Chapter 3. Building a Routine. One of the most important things I did on my journey to learning English was building a routine. Learning a language at home requires discipline because there's no teacher telling you what to do. So I had to become my own teacher. Every day I would wake up and follow a simple routine. First, I'd start with my 5 new words of the day. I would write them down on sticky notes and place them around my house. For example, I'd stick the word mirror on the bathroom mirror or the word fridge on the refrigerator. This was a way of immersing myself in English, even when I wasn't sitting down to study. After learning my words, I would spend 15 minutes reading an article or short story in English. At first, I used children's books because the language was simple and easy to understand. I didn't try to read fast or get through a lot of material. Instead, I focused on understanding every sentence, every word. If I didn't know a word, I would look it up and write it down in my notebook. Let me give you a detailed example of how this worked. One morning, I came across a word I didn't know. Tangled. I looked it up and saw it meant twisted together in a confusing way. I used that word all day. When my headphones got twisted up, I said, "My headphones are tangled." When I saw a knot in my shoelaces, I said, "My shoelaces are tangled." Repeating the word in different contexts helped me remember it, and by the end of the day, it was locked in my brain. Building a routine like this made learning English feel less overwhelming. Instead of feeling like I had to master everything at once, I focused on one thing at a time, and gradually, those small victories added up. Chapter 4. Overcoming Obstacles. Now, let's talk about the challenges I faced along the way because, believe me, there were plenty. One of the biggest obstacles was the lack of speaking practice. Since I was learning at home and didn't have a lot of people around me who spoke English, I struggled to find opportunities to practice speaking. At first, I was shy about speaking English out loud, even when I was alone. I worried that I'd sound silly or that I was making too many mistakes. But then, I realized that practicing speaking was just as important as listening and reading, so I started having conversations with myself. I know it sounds strange, but it worked. For example, I'd pretend I was at a store asking for help. "Excuse me, where can I find the bread?" Or, "How much does this cost?" I'd practice these simple phrases until they felt natural. Over time, I started feeling more comfortable speaking English, even if no one was listening. Eventually, I discovered language exchange platforms where I could connect with other learners and native speakers for conversation practice. This was a game changer. I remember my first conversation with a native speaker. I was so nervous. But after just a few sessions, I noticed my confidence growing. Studies show that learners who engage in regular conversation practice, even for just 15 minutes a day, can improve their speaking fluency by up to 50% over a 6-month period. And that was exactly my experience. The more I practiced speaking, the more fluent and confident I became. Chapter 5. The Breakthrough Moment. After months of consistent practice, I had what I like to call my breakthrough moment. It was the first time I realized that I could think in English without having to translate in my head. I remember it clearly. I was making dinner, and without thinking, I said to myself in English, "I need to add some salt to the soup." It was such a small moment, but it was huge for me. It felt like all the pieces of the puzzle were finally coming together. That's when I realized that learning a language is not about mastering grammar or memorizing vocabulary. It's about using the language to express yourself, to think, to live your daily life. This moment gave me the motivation to keep going. From that point on, I wasn't just learning English, I was living it. I started reading more challenging material, listening to podcasts in English, and even watching movies without subtitles. And each time I understood something new, it felt like a victory. So, that's my story of learning English at home. It wasn't always easy, but it was absolutely possible. I didn't need fancy classes or expensive textbooks. All I needed was dedication, a few good resources, and the willingness to keep going, even when it felt difficult. If you're learning English at home right now, I hope this story has inspired you. Remember, consistency is key. Whether you're learning 5 new words a day, practicing speaking with yourself, or watching English videos online, every small step adds up. Thank you so much for joining me today and for listening to my story. If you found this episode helpful, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and share it with others who are on the same journey. Together, we can achieve fluency and make our English learning dreams a reality. Until next time, keep learning, keep practicing, and remember, you've got this.